Paul Helman is one of the most extraordinary people I have ever met in my life, and we have become very close as I said, in the last decade or so. And Paul has been probably the leader of the 500 or so docents at the California State Railway Museum for the last 23 years. Paul Helman.
Well, thank you, Greg. That was exactly the introduction that I wrote, so you followed that extremely well. All right, so today we're going to talk about floods, fires, levees, and railroads. What else do we want to talk about? You bet. So here we go. Sacramento City, 1870. This is the oft-viewed August Cook engraving. Bird's eye view of Sacramento, capital city of California. What a story this tells. We see many elements of the city today. Much is recognizable. Sacramento River in the waterfront, the American River in the distance, the Capitol building, and very familiar streets. Numbers parallel to the Sacramento River. We note M Street, now Capitol Avenue, is wider than the others. Buildings where buildings should be, and all bracketed by railroads. Railroad tracks along the Sacramento waterfront and levee, railroad tracks on the northern edge, and more railroad tracks on the southern edge. Looking closer, we see railroad tracks on the city streets with horse-drawn trolleys. Sacramento, a survivor of floods, fires, took those disasters and made itself all that much better. Initially an outpost for trade, empire, and domination, it was a destination of choice for a large transient population of wealth seekers and speculators, and finally became a community that built itself into a significant commerce and transportation hub, serving a wide area, creating jobs and futures for many and wealth for a few. How did this happen? What stories can be told? Well, first of all, let's talk about the first inhabitants, the Nisenan, Miwok, and Maidu peoples. This is a marvelous new exhibit that every one of you should go see. Opened up not too long ago, curated by the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians, the Cultural Resource Division, and it's located at the Sacramento History Museum. Let us honor and remember who was here before us. John Sutter. He was given a Central Valley land grant by Governor Juan Bautista de Alvarado, one of the first Mexican land grants given in Central California. All the other land grants were close to the ocean, so it was easy to get to. Now what he did is he created, as we all know, because we've all been to the fort, he created a destination of choice with no competition that by using diplomacy and coercion was built and maintained by native labor. Also, he was known to be a loquacious and charming person with a record of failure in many entrepreneurial ventures, frequently in debt, and he was a known exaggerator. And what to note in this picture is water. Water is the dominant story here in Sacramento. That's a slough. At times, that slough would stretch from river to river. So it's a problem that pops up occasionally. And note that little bridge, that's J Street. Then what else happens is, well, we got the Bear Flag Revolt. We all know about this because it's a local thing. John Fremont takes control of Sutter's Fort and renames it Fort Sacramento. No longer want to call it Sutter's Fort. And then poor management on Sutter's part, deep in debt to many, extravagant lifestyle, and he had to discharge all of his Indian troops and a number of his helpers. All right, who comes up next? One institution we should always recognize is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They were forced to move from their location in Nauvoo, Illinois, and they want to move west to a Mexican province. Two things go on. They're asked to, and they agree to recruit a battalion of Mormon men that are then obviously called the Mormon Battalion, 500 men that then serve in the United States Army to help with the battle with Mexico. Parallel to this, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints charters a boat called the Brooklyn. And what the Brooklyn is going to be, it's going to be basically the transportation method to bring in all of the equipment that they're going to need to start their new life, presumably in California. Who's the person that's in charge of this? No person other than Samuel Brannan. Sam Brannan was chosen as the leader of the Brooklyn passenger relocation, and they leave New York January 12, 1846. He's a passionate leader that is viewed as the head of the church. They arrive in San Francisco in July 1846. He becomes an extremely leading citizen in San Francisco. And he was also, very early in his life, trained as a printer. A lot that he did in New York was printing the local paper. Now here's a map of what the United States looked like in 1836. Everything that's in green belongs to Mexico. They arrive in San Francisco July 31, 46, and the American flag has been raised in San Francisco July 9, 1846. Sam Brannan and his entire contingent of people that are hoping they're moving to a Mexican province to start their new life realize that they're now back in the United States. Now, they're huge believers in the freedom and the Constitution of the United States, but they just could not live the life they wanted to live. So that's one reason why they left, but they still supported it by the fact they had this Mormon battalion. So he works to create a new settlement for the church and the followers of the San Joaquin Valley, and he builds a whole establishment around where Manteca is, where the Stanislaus River comes into the San Joaquin. He also starts printing a paper, the California Star, first newspaper printed in San Francisco. So he's there for a while, but he doesn't hear any words from all the rest of the members of the church that are working their way west. He thinks they're going to show up in California. Where are they? So he goes out to find them, and he finds Brigham Young, April 26, 1847, and Brigham Young gives him the news, we are not coming to California. So what does Sam Brannan do after he gets this news? He decides to stay because he knows California is a tremendous opportunity. So he establishes a store at Sutter's Fort with his partner, C.C. Smith. And he wants to profit from the growing number of Americans coming to California. There's a lot of traffic of folks coming to California. And where does everyone generally end up? Sutter's Fort. John Sutter. Now let's talk about Sutter for a moment. He signed a contract with a carpenter by the name of John Marshall, August 27, 47, to build him a sawmill. And we know the story. Marshall decides he's got to scrub out the raceway, diverts the river. The river goes through, and then, and you all know it, you almost can shout it with me here, and then gold gets discovered. Now, gold discovered January 24th, 1848. As I always say, that's the date California history ended and began. Here's the first printed account of gold discovery. Now, this is claimed in a lot of resources that you'll find that this is a Monterey newspaper. Well, the answer is yeah, but the paper is no longer printed in Monterey. It's being printed in San Francisco. All right, now what? First account of the California Star. This is Brannan's paper. March 18, 3 days later. Gold has been discovered in the northern Sacramento district, about 40 miles above Sutter's Fort. Underneath the masthead of California Star, it says, California Star Express, 60 days to Independence, Missouri. We'll leave this place on 1st of April, New Helvetia, which of course is Sutter's Fort, on the 15th. This is Brannan's innovative idea of how to promote immigration to California. He's going to print this paper and have it sent all over the country. And this is somewhat printed, and this idea came up before the discovery of gold. But this is Brannan really creating the first marketing campaign to get people to move to California. Very smart move on his part. The 48er is born. Nobody talks about the 48ers, but the 48ers are the one that really made it happen. So who are the 48ers? Well, these are the miners from North and South America and the South Pacific who take advantage of existing travel routes. So that's how word gets out. Wherever Sutter looked, he saw intruders who disregarded his property rights. The fort was packed with transients staying just a few days. On they go. Vast majority of his workers left. Creditors are closing in. His empire was in ruins. So what does he do? Well, he decides to do what anybody would do. He gives all of his troubles to his son. He deeds all the property over to Sutter Jr., transfers the property, and then he goes to the mines to try his hand at gold mining. Now, Brannan's a smart guy. He realizes what's happening, and he wants a better location than the fort, because he knows people are taking the river to get up there. So he wants to relocate to the Embarcadero on the Sacramento River, but he can't because Sutter owns it. He wants to buy the property from Sutter. Sutter fools him by selling or giving everything to his son. So he asks his son, he says, Sutter Jr., let's make a city. Let's make a city here and let's lay it out. Let's make the plot between Sutter's Fort and the Sacramento River. And that's what they do. And it is argued that it's a better location. That's a better location than Sutterville. It's closer to the river. It's closer to the fort. It's where everybody is. It's a better location. And sales, he tells Sutter Jr., sales of the lots that we're going to make in this city are going to pay for your dad's debts. So here it is. This is the first platter map of Sacramento City, Brannon's key port of entry to the gold fields, designed with an eye to the future on a grand scale that would match the monumental scale of the gold fields and the gathering rush itself. All right, so Brannon decides to build his empire, his little store on the American River. So this is a line drawing done a little bit later than 1849, 1848. But you can see Brannon has got a real complex there. He's got a hotel, and he's got his store located at that location. August 19, 1848, New York Herald. Here's what it says. Gold mine discovered in California in December last on the South Branch of American Fork, range of low hills, distance 30 miles from New Helvetia. It is only 3 feet below the surface in a strata of soft sand rock. Almost a direct quote from Brannon's paper, now printed in New York. This answers the question, where did the information for the first paper, first report of gold discovery in California, where'd that come from? Came from Brannon's Express. This might be Sam Brannon's greatest contribution to the California, is this newspaper that he chooses to send east. Great example of marketing. Now, here come the 49ers. Got 9,000 people leave 90 ships in just January all over the United States. Could they read this report? 35,000 by sea, 42,000 hike across the country. And the first boat to show up with these folks is the steamer California, February 18, 1849. So that sort of begins the gold rush, February 18. All right, Sacramento City, 1849. It's created by merchants for merchants. The city was the anchor for regional trade. Those that arrived before 1849 gained tremendous influence because they were there first and they got the prime locations. They became the major landowners, city leaders, merchants, and traders. Brannon led the way. Now they need a government. There is no government in the state of California. It's not a state, it's not a territory. It's only the military, and there's not enough of them to provide any kind of control or government. So people get together and they start to organize themselves. Congress was unable to create the basis for any territorial government. The military government suddenly figures they got to do something, so they call for territory-wide elections, August 1st. So what happens is that people in Sacramento also vote for and create a city government when this election happens on August 1st. Now we got a city council. We got something that can do, make things happen. Sacramento got 10,000 people in it. That's a lot of people for something that didn't exist just a few months before. Now we're going to talk about 349ers. They demonstrate how Sacramento became a community. Bigelow. He arrived on the first ship to California, February 28, 1849. He was a trained civil engineer, spent some time in the West Indies, got word of gold, and he decides to come to California on the first steamship from New York. He was a very, very early advocate for building a levee to protect the city. Mark Hopkins, he with his brother Gus and his cousin Sherwood, they leave New York. But he became a traveling merchant. He decided, he tried this gold mining thing for a while, and he just didn't like it. So he buys himself a team of oxen, a team of horses, and he goes and he supplies the miners. Because the miners are out there in the middle of nowhere, and they need to have a certain amount of their needs met. So he realizes, my future is in this business of selling goods. Collis Potter Huntington. He goes into partnership with his brother Solon to sell hardware. He's not going to mine gold. He has never any intention of going to the mines. And he brings goods to San Francisco to sell to the miners. Collis Potter Huntington is the absolute peddler of all peddlers. Now we got a land title dispute going on. The arriving Americans, they feel no obligation to respect the Mexican land grants. It's America. As we all know, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo respects the Mexican land grants. They guarantee that they will be respected. But many of the settlers get together and they organize the Sacramento City Settlers Association, and they're going to work the issue. Land speculators drove these small little lots that Brannon had laid out up to $8,000 a lot. All right, so here we have Bucolic, Sacramento, December 20, 1849. Beautiful location. Look at the trees. We have buildings. We've got people. We've got business. We're in business because we're going to supply the miners. A lot of the miners have showed up in Sacramento because it's kind of snowy in the mountains at this time, so we have a lot of business opportunity. But now we got rain. And do we have rain? 15 inches in December, 27 inches in 3 months. Another warm, heavy storm hits January 8th. At noon, the American River overflowed. Then the Sacramento River overflowed. 4/5 of the city is underwater. This is the flood of January 1850. Now, February 15th, Hardin-Bigelow presents a report to the council on the construction of a levee. Note the date, February 15th. He says, we need to build a levee. And so here's sort of an editorial in the paper. Note the date there, March 30, a month and a half. Editorial says, there are many who seem to think, now just note the date here, March 30. There are many who seem to think that it will be at least half a century before the water will be again so high, and that a levee will be an unnecessary expense. Printed in the paper, March 30, 1850. Bigelow's elected mayor March 1st, 1850, after the Sacramento becomes incorporated by the state legislature. Now, state is still not a state, but the state legislature is a provisional state, and so they issue the first charter in the state of California to Sacramento. February 27th. 10 inches of rain come in March, and snow melt from 90-degree weather cause all the rivers to overflow April 10th. April 10th. Bigelow takes immediate action. Just 2 days after becoming mayor, he sends out the call for volunteers, hires 80 men who build 3 miles of levees, some of it at his own expense. Personally spent almost 4 continuous days on his horse, riding back and forth, saving Sacramento from another disastrous flood. Mark Hopkins, what's he doing in 1850? Well, he returns to Sacramento from his store. In April, with a partner friend of his that he met on the boat, Edward Miller, he opens a grocery store, 160 J Street. They develop business connections with many of the mining towns. They sell $13,000 worth of groceries, and he buys a lot for $3,000. And he decides to make Sacramento his home. What about Collis Potter Huntington? He's sitting in a wet tent in Sacramento, suffering through this rainstorm and flood that's going on. And he gets really smart. He says, I'm going to use Sacramento as a distribution center. I'm not going to have these distributed stores. And he bought a lot on K Street. He becomes the buyer. And his partner runs the store out of a canvas-roofed building. What about the levee? Well, the city of Sacramento passes a special tax fund to fund the levee. It passes 543 to 15. And they finish building the levee December 30. And the stories in the paper talk about when they get the levee finished, everybody goes on top of the levees and they march along it. Look at the levee. Look at all the action going on there. We got boats on the river. We got people hiking with goods. We got merchants and people, and we got stores. It's just a really exciting thing. These early engravings are just wonderful. We have violence. We have what's known as the squatters' riots. They want to solve their issue about this land grant problem. Shots are fired, and the confrontation on August 14th and 15th result in 5 people dead, a number wounded, including our hero mayor. Hardin-Bigelow becomes very much injured. Soon after that, cholera breaks out in October, causing 4/5 of the population to leave. Estimates of the death toll range from 700 to 2,000. Sacramento rose again, and within just a few months, it had a population of 10,000. What happens to Hardin-Bigelow? Now he gets severely injured with 4 gunshot wounds in the violence of the squatters' riot, and he goes to San Francisco to recuperate. But he returns to Sacramento and resumes some of his duties. So he's recovered enough he could actually work. Then he goes back to San Francisco on business. While there, he contracts cholera and dies November 27th. What's going on with Mark Hopkins in 1851? Well, he sails for California April 11 with his brother Moses. They purchase a lot on K Street, located right next to a guy by the name of Collis Potter Huntington. The flood of 1852, the levee broke near the mouth of the American River on May 7th, lasted 4 days. Citizens just build boats and carry on. They just keep moving around doing business. The council then now has a levee built along I Street to high ground to Sutter's Ford. So instead of having this levee that just goes parallel to the river, they now make a levee and curve it around to get to high ground. Oh, now we have a fire. Everything's made out of wood. So we have something going on in a millinery shop someplace, catches on fire, burns 80% of the city. And this is where you see the center picture there where the shaded area is. That's where the fire was. Fire takes out 80% of Sacramento, rebuilt almost instantly. Now we got a flood, 1853. Little damage is done. But however, this flood causes the city to pass an ordinance to improve the levee. That is the last flood for 8 years. Now, 1853, we have what's known as the Pacific Railroad Survey. One of the hottest topics that's talked about in the newspapers almost every day, certainly every week, is this thing called the Pacific Railroad, Pacific Railway. We want to connect the West Coast to the East Coast. 1853, we build the city waterworks. We've already talked about the city getting all tore up. A lot of debate about how this waterworks should get its water. So they decide to build this building. They get a big pump, driven it by steam, and they suck the water out of the American River. They got a tank built on top of the building, holds 240,000 gallons, got enough head that it can make water work. So that's what they do. It provides for fire protection. We've had this really terrible fire. This is what we're going to do. Got to put in hydrants. And this is the first publicly funded waterworks west of the Mississippi. Railroads. Lots and lots and lots of railroads with almost zero action. People are always talking about building a railroad. Let's build a railroad here. Let's go to there. Let's go to the mines. Let's go to this location. Nothing is ever done. Now we have Theodore Judah shows up. Man by the name of Colonel Wilson. Oh, let me get control of the Sacramento Valley Railroad. And he goes and hires Theodore Judah from Buffalo to come and be the engineer to do the design work and construction of what becomes the Sacramento Valley Railroad. Well, Judah does what any smart engineer would do. What's the business? So take a look at these numbers here. He goes to the J Street Bridge, where we already looked at, right by Sutter's Fort, and he counts 971 tons of freight. And he knows that that's the business the railroad is going to take. 500 passengers daily. Sacramento Valley Railroad, that's what he does. City Council passes an ordinance giving Sacramento Valley Railroad the right to build on top of the R Street levee. Here's a wonderful picture in the Pictorial Union of the first excursion of the Sacramento Valley Railroad. You can see everybody's in the back, hooping and hollering. What a great day. Again, we know how to do celebrations in Sacramento. Ah, what are Hopkins and Huntington doing in 1855? They enter the hardware business on May 1 as Huntington, Hopkins and Company, located at 5254 K Street. And here is their business. And that building has been recreated in Old Sacramento. You can enjoy today. What do they do from 1856 to 61? Well, Hopkins serves one term on the city council, and he works closely with fellow council member Charles Crocker. With Charles' brothers Edwin and support from Huntington, they create the California Republican Party. Merchant Leland Stanford, later joins them, and together they support things as known as the Public Library, the Vigilance Committee, and a wagon road over the Sierra. Oh, what's going on? We're building the Capitol. So I'm showing you a picture of an unfinished Capitol because it doesn't get finished till 1876, and our story ends in 1870. The floods of 1861. Oh, these are the really bad ones. 37 inches of rain, December and January. And the geography. Central Valley is a natural flood basin. It's designed to flood. This particular flood, there were 4 separate inundations. December 9th, December 23rd, January 9th, January 23rd. Various levee breaks. Then the levees trap water in the city. Now, if you're going to ring your city with a big berm, you better figure out a way to get that water out. Well, they didn't think about that. All the water fills, and there was a record level of water in the rivers. So what happens is, you see where I've got in red 31st Street, that's where the levee breaks. The water starts flowing around the backside of the levee and comes in through an opening in the levee at 16th Street. So we're flowing all this water, essentially the entire flow of the American River, goes behind the levee and then enters into the city. And you read the reports in the paper, and this was like almost a holiday, because I guess it wasn't raining, so everybody builds a boat, and they just float around, and away they go. Oh, Theodore Judah, what's he doing right now? Well, Theodore Judah, based on his first-hand Sierra surveys, he prints and distributes a practical plan for building the Pacific Railroad. Judah should be given credit for the guy who really makes the Pacific Railroad happen. He unfortunately has been dismissed because somebody described him as Crazy Judah long after Judah died, and he was not able to defend himself. But Theodore Judah is right up there with Asa Whitney talking about building the Pacific Railroad, and he actually makes it happen. He creates a railroad called the Central Pacific. And look who his major shareholders are. Hopkins, Huntington, Crocker, and Stanford. Later on, Crocker's brother Edwin Bryant joins them, and we have the 5 associates. Theodore Judah returns to D.C., and with his tremendous amount of work, he passes the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862. Pivotal act, makes America happen. This provides the funding mechanism to build the railroad. Judah's practical plan is a reality. This is this beautiful John Macquarie mural that sits on the east wall of the Southern Pacific Passenger Station. And what does this show? This shows the groundbreaking, which is actually a dirt dumping of the creation of the Central Pacific Railroad. You see these handsome guys in the middle. They're taking dirt out of a cart, dumping it down. And these are the associates. That's Leland Stanford with the shovel. That's Charlie Crocker on the podium giving a talk. Also at the same time, we got to straighten out the American River. So you see from these 2 drawings here, the drawing on the left is what the Sacramento River looked like. One of the things that they decided to do is that the water was just pooling up too much at the base of the American River. They actually cleared everything out, all the brush, all the trees, everything gets removed, and they create this new channel. Now also going on is we got to raise the streets. What you see here by this colored graph are when the streets got raised. You'll find this in a study that's done online, 1864 through 1871. The deep red are the first streets they had to raise, Front Street, I Street, and that's that. And then this is a kind of an interesting map that shows really how high they had to raise them. So as you would imagine, the deeper red is the height that they had to raise the streets and create the sidewalks. Now here's what Front Street looked like when they get done and the railroad gets built. The railroad, that's the Central Pacific Railroad, builds on the levee. They build their passenger station. 1867 is when that passenger station was built. You see the waterworks building. That's on the north end of Front Street. That's where all the water comes from. And we see a railroad track. That's the railroad track that connects up to our street. And this is where they're traveling passengers. So the railroad is successful. We start building central shops. We saw those pictures on that 1870 engraving. These are what are known as the associates. These are the paintings that are hanging at the Crocker Art Museum. Now, who makes men successful? Here's their wives, right here. Now, every one of them outlived their husbands. So they inherited, in today's money, $51 billion. 6 years and 4 months later, the railroad is complete. You now know a few stories about how Sacramento ended up looking like this in 1870.